What is good, my ex-homies? It is your boy Jacob Gooden, and we are back for another week in the Ex-Homeschoolers Club. That is right. This week, I'm joined by a brand new ex-homie friend. That is my new friend, Marsh, and they are going to talk about some really interesting stuff. We're going to talk about the ACES curriculum. We're going to talk about having your grandparents be your homeschool teacher. We're going to talk about also the way that homeschooling has changed. Marsh is probably the youngest person I've had on the podcast, and so the most recent to graduate from the homeschool experience. And it was just really cool to hear how things shifted and changed. They have a very unique and interesting story, and yeah, I'm really excited for you guys to hear it. It's a little long of an episode, but that's because we were just having such a good time we couldn't end it. But before I turn it over to past me, I do want to ask a favor. If you watch the show on YouTube, or if you're listening on audio and you didn't even know that there's a YouTube channel associated with it, I would love if you would hit that subscribe. Okay, I'm just shy of 200 subscribers, and I'm just trying to hit that goal. I would love if you do me that favor. So, thank you so much. I'm gonna turn it over to past me, and we'll see you in just a second. Well, Marsh, we are here. I'm stoked to be chatting with you. It's
Yeah, hi.
welcome to the Ex-Homeschoolers Club. Let's just start there.
I'm happy to be here, but I'm happy to be out.
Yeah.
I like that X part.
Yeah.
That's a situationship I don't want to go back to.
Yeah. No, I don't blame you. It's not for
Yeah.
everybody. That's for sure.
No, no.
Well, we got connected, I
Uh,
think, over TikTok, if I'm not
yes,
mistaken.
yeah.
And
I had found your page on my For You page, actually.
nice.
I had been going through Reddit looking for, I'm sure you've seen the Homeschool Recovery
Yes.
subreddit.
Yep.
And I think that infected my phone with just homeschool stuff all around. So, but hey, it led me here. So,
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we got connected, and it means the algorithm is actually working for us, not against us. Um,
exactly.
so without further ado, I'm gonna just kind of like turn it over to you, just to give us like a little bit of like a snapshot. Explain your homeschool experience. How long were you homeschooled? Maybe where, siblings, whatever you feel like sharing.
Yeah.
Just give us a little overview of your homeschool experience.
Okay. Yeah. So from a very early age, I started off in just preschool in small rural town, Woodward, Oklahoma. Um, but very quickly I went over to a place called the Woodward Christian Academy. Um, Shortly after that, probably around second or third grade, I went into homeschooling due to just I was a young ADHD kid. I was struggling in that environment. And my grandmother pulled me out. I was homeschooled on and off periodically through those first few years. But once I hit fifth grade on until sophomore year, I was homeschooled. Sophomore year is where homeschooling ended for me. What had occurred was we experienced a loss in the family that just hit us pretty hard, and it caused me to run away from home. So that was kind of the final straw in my homeschooling career. My grandmother and I weren't compatible in that way of a teacher student. So she sent me to public school. Graduating class of 13 kids.
Yeah,
Awesome.
rural Oklahoma for you.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
yeah. But more in depth on my homeschooling experience, I stayed with the reason the Woodward Christian Academy is so prevalent is because that is where I received my homeschooling curriculum. It's technically what my grandma went through throughout my just homeschooling experience in entirety. Um, they used what we call the accelerated Christian education system.
Right.
Um, and that is not only can you have accredited schools with that curriculum, you can also order the books and teach your kids at home. It's a very uh solitary learning environment. So whether or not you are in a room with peers of a similar age to you or you're at your dining room table, it's going to be about the same. You're going to read through your paces, do your work, you're going to check and grade your own work. And until you reach the test, you're doing it on your own.
Yep, we got
Oh,
a
we
little
have a
cat
little
spot.
cameo.
Yeah.
Cat cam,
Yeah.
sorry, she distracted me. But yeah, it was just we had I went to a homeschool co-op about once a week, more in the middle school slash early high school years. And that was great for connection, but it was still rural Oklahoma. There were only so many people who would show up, and if a family was sick, it probably meant 5 families were sick and it was canceled that month. And so homeschooling for me was just kind of like I was already in a very small bubble with the location I lived in, and homeschooling just further enclosed that bubble.
So you brought up, do you have any siblings that were also
Oh, no,
homeschooled?
I do not.
Okay.
I do not have any siblings. I spoke of my grandmother, so I was adopted when I was 5 by my biological grandmother,
Okay.
and that already sets up for a pretty interesting
Right.
situation. You have kids that live with their grandparents, but I don't know. I haven't heard of many people being adopted by their grandparents outside of Oklahoma.
Uh,
I've met probably 2 or 3 people from my hometown that were also adopted by their grandparents.
yeah.
It's a little odd.
It is kind of a strange experience. I had a friend growing up who his grandparents also adopted him, and raised him,
Okay.
and things like that. So I'm a little bit kind of familiar, the family dynamic of what
Yeah.
that kind of looks like. They didn't
Yeah.
homeschool their grandson, but
Yeah.
it can be weird. It can be good. It can be a lot of different
Right.
things.
Yeah. It's a really big generation gap.
Yes.
And so there's an understanding there that you have to try really hard to achieve
Yeah.
because it's 2 completely different generational mindsets
Yeah.
and 2 completely different ways of going about life. And one is raising the other. So
Yeah.
raising for example, a baby boomer raising a Gen Z as if I were a millennial like my parents.
Right.
And it's a different era. It calls for different times, call for different measures.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But with her homeschooling, uh I feel like if I did have siblings, it would have been a situation where we couldn't have been homeschooled. I
Okay.
feel like that would have warranted needing public school just with my family dynamic because I had from the age of 2, my grandmother had hired a babysitter, she later turned into a tutor.
Okay.
She was my homeschooling tutor for years until about probably freshman year, I want to say.
Okay.
I want to say she didn't feel like she could handle. I remember her saying she didn't want to do high school algebra again.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, can you
She
blame
didn't want to do
anybody?
that. Yeah, science and maths, they weren't. I feel like that was something that was pretty difficult for me. I wasn't wired the way that my fellow homeschoolers were. And I feel like a big part of that was a special kind of ADHD, and I'm not specifically diagnosed with anything besides depression and anxiety,
Okay.
but there's obviously a wiring difference
Yeah.
in the way that I view the world and react in the world versus the way that my peers then or now do or did.
So I wanted to ask then, like, so you had a tutor. So how
Mhm.
heavily involved was your grandma then in the homeschooling experience? Was she super heavily involved, or was she just kind of like, okay, we're doing this? Because you mentioned, there was some dynamics in the family where you kind of
Mhm.
needed to be homeschooled, because of
Yes.
needing to go places or whatever, and so public school wasn't going
Mhm.
to really work out. But
Yeah.
so was she primarily teacher, or was it mostly this tutor person that she had come in?
So it was kind of a give and take situation with them. My tutor would be my supervisor,
Okay.
supervisor while I was doing my work, and my grandmother would more take care of the end of the book test things. So in a sense, it's administrative versus secretarial,
Mhm.
which is kind of what they were. So my tutor Kathy, she would just keep an eye on me and make sure I was doing what I was supposed to do. Um, and I loved her. She was great.
Mhm.
She's my godmother. She raised me practically because besides school, my grandmother wasn't really too active in my growing up years. She got a babysitter for me at the age of 2, and
Mhm.
then my grandmother adopted me at the age of 5. But throughout that entire time, Kathy was the one with me from about 10 in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you know?
Yeah.
And that's a little kid. That's a toddler. That's a baby.
Yeah.
So she was my grandmother by any and all means,
Okay.
for sure.
You also brought up using the ACE curriculum, the ACE curriculum, and for anyone who's not familiar with that, I highly recommend like looking it up because it is kind of an interesting thing. I had seen it before at a friend's house. My family never used it. We started with a Becca just because that was what my mom had used in school. But
Okay.
having seen and now even like having kind of like pulled up their website and like flipped through it and been like, okay, let me take a look
Hmm.
at what this looks like. So it very much is like a
Right.
workbook, like per section, but maybe you could kind of explain, I guess, maybe how it operates better than somebody who never did it could. But basically, what it looked like to me was like miniature workbooks, which I believe are called the paces, and you kind of flip
Hmm.
through those and almost a work at your own speed kind of a situation.
Yes, yeah. And this was just something that I want to touch on before I forget. Was your mom also homeschooled? You said she used a Becca.
No, she was not. She went to a private Christian
Okay.
school. And so a BECA
Okay.
curriculum, for anyone who's not familiar, a BECA curriculum is designed to be a like full school curriculum. And I believe
Mhm.
ACE also kind of can be as well.
Fully accredited. You
Yes.
can graduate without receiving a GED.
Okay.
You get a diploma.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. So a lot of the curriculums that I think become popular for homeschool kids tend to be those because
Mhm.
I mean, if you're a homeschool parent and you have just decided to homeschool your kid, what is if you don't have an education in education,
Educating.
right? Like, how
Yeah.
do you don't know how to build out a curriculum? And so my mom,
Exactly.
I think she just kind of used it as a like, okay, here's an easy jumping off point for us, and then we'll figure out what kind of works from that. She knew that there was other ways to do it because she was connected to a homeschool co-op and kind of networking group, so to speak. But she was like, okay, this will just be kind of the easy way out to begin with, and we can kind of feel it out. And
Yeah.
it wasn't the right fit for us. So as time went on,
Hmm.
we slowly progressed into more and more things. And just to give you some
Okay.
context,
Okay.
I went to public school until through first grade and then transitioned in second grade. My sister was
Okay.
all the way through, and we did all the way through high school, graduated as homeschool kids. And so I had kind of that public school mentality going into it where like that first year, second grade was
Yeah.
hard because I was like, I'm used to going to a classroom with other kids. My
Yeah.
sister never had any of that. So for her, it was just like, oh yeah, this is normal. This is what we do. So
There wasn't another experience to compare that with.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah,
Yeah.
so share a little bit about the ACE like curriculum and like what that looks
Yeah.
like and things like that.
So the ACE curriculum, like you said, it's just little, I want to say approximately 35, 40-page books, and I may be off on that. Some were longer, some were
Right.
shorter. It just depended what they wanted you to learn through that little segment. Something that the ACE curriculum prides itself on is that they want to teach kids how to oh, what's the word? The ACE curriculum wants to teach kids to motivate themselves and um, assign themselves with work they know they can complete. And following that, I think it's funny that it's so um, self-driven, but there are still the rules and guidelines that you need to follow. So, for example, they want you to set your own amount of work that you want to complete each day in each book. We would have about 5 books, I want to say. I believe when you get to high school, it's 6. Um, we would have to assign ourselves at least 4 to 5 pages, depending if there was a checkpoint in between, it would just, you'd lose a page or whatever. Um, and you were meant to keep yourself motivated throughout the whole day to get through and check off that list and go through all those pages and get that done. And what's so surprising is how little that works in a cubicle type situation, at least for the privatized schools. At home for me, it was drudging. I don't even know if that's the correct word to use, but it was almost impossible to drag through. The ACE curriculum is such a literalist interpretation of biblical scripture, and
Okay.
that's in every single booklet that you read. It's not just a booklet on the Bible that you learn from. uh each pace was each pace had a scripture that
Okay.
you would have to memorize along with your information. So in your math textbook, while you were learning geometry, you were memorizing Philippians 4:13.
Okay.
And in your social studies, you were memorizing a verse from Matthew. And
Right.
it was just very slowly integrating just Bible verse by Bible verse in with what should be real world knowledge that
Okay.
you're learning.
Let me ask you this because so like I had some of my curriculum was very had that Christian aspect to it, where
Mhm.
Bible verses were, you know, they they were incorporated. We weren't necessarily
Yeah.
memorizing all of them. That was more of like if you've ever heard of Awana was like
Awana.
Awana was like
I have.
it's kind of like youth group ish, like a church youth group kind of a setting, but
Oh,
it mixed with
yeah.
Boy Scout, Girl Scouts. So you would wear like you had like a uniform that you would wear and we'd play games and then you had textbooks that you would or it's not textbooks but little workbooks you would work through and you'd memorize scripture and you got
Mhm.
badges and things like that. So it's kind of this
Yeah.
hybrid of the two. Um,
That's really interesting. It's mixing in a real merit system.
yeah, and it would be
Yeah.
based, yeah, exactly, and so it had this weird kind of, uh, like I said, it was like kind of Boy Scouty, Girl Scouty type thing with games thrown in there. So very like youth group,
Yeah.
Sunday school esque ness to it. That was mostly where my like biblical memorization came from. Was things like that.
Yeah.
Less so my textbooks, but what I was gonna ask was that the the were these textbooks like my mom let me rephrase this. My mom really believed in like us learning what like math, for instance. She was like, you got to know
Mhm.
what 2 plus 2 equals. And not just in a way of like, you can regurgitate it for a test and then it like leaves your brain kind of a way. She was like, you need to
Mhm.
understand this concept of like how math operates and things like that. And, it
Yeah.
gets to a degree where it's like, you just need a basic understanding of how things operate in the world, whether it's, learning how to read
Right.
and write and
You need a
do
basic
math
skill
and
set
write like those types of things.
for
And I
yeah.
know that some curriculums kind of lend themselves more to like, hey, you just got to kind of like know it to the end of the book and then like just memorize it in a sense. And then you can kind of like wipe it out of your memory, free up that space, and learn the next thing.
Right.
And so I wonder if
Yeah.
the ACEs curriculum like lended itself more to that way of thinking, or was it actually a good building block system of like, hey, you've learned this, now we're going to move on to this next thing?
At least for me, it was very much a once the test is over, you can kind of just let it go
Okay.
situation. And I don't know if partially that was because the Christian values behind the education I was taking in didn't sit right with me, or if it was just because this is a curriculum based on repetition and memorization.
Okay.
And it's evident that it's a curriculum based on memorization when at the end of every 5 pages, you're rewriting a scripture verse.
Right.
I don't know how they haven't been sued for students getting carpal tunnel. That's that because but it's definitely I think for if if my opinion could be true, I would say that most students would agree with me when they would feel kind of just lent the short stick for educational matters.
Okay.
Because a lot of it isn't the educational material within the ACE curriculum isn't meaty. It
Right.
isn't fulfilling. And I think that's something else too that and this is something I'm just thinking of that must have made it so incompatible for me as I wasn't really being challenged. But at the same time, it was a little difficult for me to retain the information, which is something that I do lend to just the traumatic experience of it all lent in with rural Oklahoma.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
too, to your point of like the meatiness of like a curriculum, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talked about, my family, we used a Becca to begin with, and we transitioned out of that. And part of the reason for that was my mom started to realize, she's like, okay, the great thing about homeschool was that we could lean into the things we were interested in. So we can give
Yes.
them the knowledge base of what they want to know. I loved pirates as a little kid. So what are we going to do? We're going to just study
Yeah.
pirates until Jacob knows everything there is to know about
Everything.
pirates, right? It's like, my
Beautiful.
favorite pirate is Calico Jack. Why is that? I know the whole history of it, right? No one's ever heard of
Yeah.
Calico Jack aside from another pirate
I don't
nerd, right? Um,
I don't believe I've heard of Calico Jack.
Everyone
Yeah,
knows
no, you're right.
Blackbeard and Jack Sparrow. That's about it. Like that's kind of, and Jack
See,
Sparrow's
yeah.
not even real, guys. Um, these other
Ugh,
guys are
not
real.
even a real pirate. Oh my gosh. No, I love just this is so off topic, but I love that pirate culture is still alive and well in
Yes,
2025.
yes. Um, and so
Oh.
they leaned into that, right? And so that's where like that meatiness that you're talking about kind of comes from, where it's like, okay, my kid loves this thing. Let's just give them all
Mhm.
of the materials they need to like further learn this thing. And I think with a curriculum like ACE, and even I would argue maybe a Becca, it kind of lacks that because it's just
Yeah.
maybe it's meant to be the building blocks, and the intention is like, hey, a parent can add this supplemental content on top. But if you're in a situation like
Mhm.
you where maybe grandma doesn't have the capacity to even provide that for you, it
Right.
it it really kind of cheats you out a little bit of the educational aspect of it.
Something that I think homeschooling is excellent for is being able to lean into your children's hyperfixations like that, for sure. But something that I do think a lot of parental educators lack is being in touch with their children in the way of seeing them as another little person who has interests and things that they just don't like and struggle with, rather than just seeing it as, oh, I need to, make sure my kid learns this or blah, 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 or my kid needs to do this before they can go have fun with what they're interested in. Um, and I think at least more of the Midwest and South, that's just kind of the societal climate, at least, of just pull up your bootstraps and get school done.
Yeah.
Get it done, go get a job, go get a career. And that's what's really difficult for homeschoolers, at least down here, I think, is that they don't get a well-rounded experience before they're shoved out of the nest into the world. And when you're in a curriculum like ACE, and I also knew some people in Abeka, so people in curriculums like that, when your parent just has decided, like, okay, this is good enough, it's past using it as a building block when at least the mindset for Oklahomans is this one's got to last a while. It's for some reason it's the same ideology behind I don't know why this popped in my head. Buying good, like, machinery, buying the best fridge. You just want it to
Right.
work and stick around. And I feel like, at least for my grandma, that was her take on it, that it was good enough for her. It had, to her, a good moral leaning. To her, it had enough proper education for her to, and my grandmother is a registered nurse. She's a smart lady in herself,
Hmm.
and her reasoning behind not putting me through public school is due to her being bullied in public school.
Okay.
And she went to school in the same town that I was raised in. She never really left Woodward, Oklahoma. Um and with that, she's always struggled with moving with the times, and that was something that just persisted throughout my adolescent life, that once we had something, that was good. Nothing needed changed about it, and we would just get through it. Uh Something that I will say my grandmother did have a good point on is that the ACE curriculum is excellent for anyone experiencing, like, a non-stable period in their life. for example, my grandpa was going through some health challenges, so we weren't really home all the time. We were back and forth between Woodward and Oklahoma City for hospital visits. And the paces are just something you can throw in a folder and carry around.
Right.
It is the ease is amazing. The ease is great. But that even further isolates you in a way when you're not even at your kitchen table anymore.
Right.
You're in your car. You're in a hospital where this isn't a safe space for you, you know?
Yeah.
But that's just the specific.
Yeah. Well, I think
Yeah.
you make a great point there of like, and I said this before too. It's like my mom, we started with a backup because, okay, there's some
Mhm.
structure to it. It's a transition period. Whether it's traumatic or just overwhelming or whatever, you have this thing that's already structured and built for you.
Yeah.
That's great, right? A lot
Yeah.
of people need that. They need a
Yeah.
jumping off point. It's that next step of like, the ACE might be a great curriculum for some people. I didn't use it, so maybe it is.
Right.
Um, maybe it's not. Marsh, you might.
At least for those literalist fundamentalist Baptists out
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
If that sounds like you, you're gonna have a heyday.
Yeah, great promotion here for those specific people.
Yeah.
There we go. But it's a great jumping off point to get that structure that you need. And then, like we've been talking about, it's just adding in those extra things of like, that's the whole point about homeschooling for a lot of, I think it should be at
Right.
least, is that extracurricular element where it's like you get to customize the education to tailor your child. That's a
Right.
huge deal.
It is. And it can change a life, and you
Right.
won't even know, because from such an early age you can either have the best schooling experience or a really poor schooling experience that maybe sets you back in the future.
Yeah.
But if the ideal, so at least my take on homeschooling is you can do it wrong, you can do it in a way that you are going to hurt your child, whether it's educationally or mentally or emotionally, but you can also do it right.
Mhm.
There is a way to go about it where you can be a loving parent as well as the person who kind of teaches your child navigating just life.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there has to be a really good balance between being a parent and being that teacher. And I feel like that's something that a lot of parents struggle with. They don't have a line in between
Yeah.
the two personas. And at least for as someone who was a homeschooled child, I didn't really particularly like my grandmother, the person who was supposed to be caring for me emotionally, telling me I did a really bad job and just
Right.
I need to retake the whole book and blah 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 blah. That's just not, kids don't show their parents their grade cards for a reason.
Yeah.
They don't want their parents to hear about their grades. That's something that at least for my non-homeschooled friends, I've always said, yeah, you didn't want them to see your B minus. I didn't want mine to grade my test.
Yep.
Because oh my God, it's just cemented in my mind, her pointing finger trailing across the paper with her red pen, Xing, circling, writing over my essay.
I wanted to bring this up too because you brought up a great point of um somewhat of like the or something you said made me think of like the isolation of also growing up in rural Oklahoma. You said even just like when you did go to public school, your graduating class was 13 people. My graduating class as a homeschool
Yes.
kid was 12 people. So not a huge
Wow.
difference.
That's something that I thought of in public school. It wasn't a very big change.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I'm learning a lot more now is that because I'm starting to make friends who do road schooling where they RV and they go around and I was like, how do your kids have
Okay.
friends? And they were like, well, there's the
Right.
internet. And I'm like, well, duh. And their
Yeah.
kids they play video games online and they Zoom call each other and they text each other and whatever. And I realized I was like, so there really is no excuse anymore for homeschool kids to be isolated and antisocial because we
Right.
have the internet. We have these great tools to make friends online. I say that in a kind of generalized parents should still be involved, kind of like it is dangerous out there.
Right,
The internet
yeah.
can be a scary place,
Yes.
kind of a way,
And it is for sure.
but there are safe places for homeschool kids to make friends from across the country and do pen. I mean, people
Yes.
used to do pen pals back in the day. Like, yeah, how did that
Right,
start? How do you get
yeah.
connected with somebody, halfway across the world? Um,
I
you
know.
know, so so there very much is like opportunities, I think, for a lot of these rural areas to have some of that diversity of like you could have easily been friends with someone in California and someone else on the
Right?
East Coast, in Boston or whatever, where
Mhm.
we can kind of create these support groups almost of and these friendships where it
Yeah.
limits that isolation to some degree, as well.
It definitely does. The only thing that I see being kind of a blockade for that is at least in the town that I grew up in. And this is something I'm sure you've heard being from California, having interacted with people not from either of the coasts. The further in you get, the less technologically advanced it seems,
Yep.
at least climate wise. And my specific situation, I did not have a phone until I was 16.
Okay.
So that was 4 years ago. God, that was about, yeah, 4 or 5 years ago. And you'll find a lot of parents who really do limit their child's internet access and use of technology due to it being a dangerous place for
Right.
young people. And that is such a valid fear. I had my own experiences online where I experienced grooming, where I experienced sexual assault online from a young age. And that is the real fear behind it, but there is, at least from my perspective being the kid, there was taking it too far of, okay, your kid messed up once and it wasn't even really their fault, and you're going to deny them means to connection and means to anything but loneliness and isolation for years.
Right.
And that's the Midwestern stubborn attitude of you mess up once, you don't get it again. And I think that that is a real struggle with homeschoolers down here, is that they either don't get access to internet like, most kids do, and kids in public school, having school laptops, for example. Oh, sorry. It's never mind. It was kind of unrelated. I just thought of my brain has been all politics recently, and Ryan Walters has to do with public schoolers, but public schoolers aren't allowed to use their phone from first to last bell in school anymore.
Okay.
Not one bit gets taken from them for, I believe, it depends on the school, but they can take it for the whole school week.
Dang.
I just know he blocked, yeah. Anyway, I
Can be
have
good.
my own feelings.
Yeah, it can be. It
Yes,
can be
yeah.
good. I think there's something to be said about teaching proper phone and laptop etiquette. I'm a big advocate
Yes,
for things
yeah.
like there's a great book called Indistractable, which talks about it talks about these guys right here. It talks about the dings, the bings, the whistles,
Yeah.
the whistles, not the whistles, the whistles, and how you can like you need to teach yourself how to ignore those things so that you can actually
Mhm.
maintain being a productive person to some degree. And I think that those
Yeah,
are things
yeah.
that should and will get taught at some point in the education system and at young ages, and parents need to learn them as well.
Right. And thinking about it even further, millennials or my generation were really the first generation to full have like almost lifelong access
Yes.
to the internet. And that's something that I feel like maybe humanity as a whole hasn't realized how new technology is and how much it probably is fucking us up, and
Yeah.
we aren't even able to look back and realize. It's kind of like scientists wanted to figure out the effects of microplastics on the human body, but they couldn't find a control group. And I believe technology is the same way.
Mhm.
We won't know until 50 more years down the line, wherever it takes us,
Yeah.
um, what that does to a person's brain. And at least for adolescents who are at home, maybe doing their schooling through the internet, Becca was mostly online, correct?
When I did it, it was textbooks, but
Okay.
I'm sure that it's probably primarily online at this point. Um,
Okay.
you and I are not that much older. I was going to bring this up because
Mhm.
you're fairly fresh out of the homeschool world.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
When did you left sophomore year, which was 20?
So that was 2021.
Okay,
So my grandfather passed away in 2020, which shortly after led to me leaving home and then staying the summer of 2021, yes, with my father in South Dakota. So that was a big change,
yeah,
a big abrupt. And then I went to public school, which was another complete change to the world I had known.
yeah,
Because that, even though I had gone to a private Christian school and I had had about the same classmates that I did at that first public high school that I attended, it was still it still felt different
yeah,
because privatized Christian schools, we didn't leave our classroom. Our grade had a classroom. This small public school I went to, I was following the same kids around to different classrooms each day, but it was still one group of uh 10th graders. 10th graders, is that what you were sophomore year?
no,
It
sophomore,
was just
yeah, sophomore is 10th grade. Yes,
yeah. It was just 13 10th graders walking down the line to our coding class, to our English class, to our math class. And in a way, it kind of felt like what I had been doing mentally through the years of homeschooling.
hmm
Uh, something that homeschooling, I think, lended me or maybe blessed me with was I have a great imagination. And something that it leans into is the fancy term for it is maladaptive daydreaming, but it's basically just disassociation into another world almost entirely, to where you're just so dissatisfied with where you are currently. Being in a fictional reality is better than
right,
being where you are. And I can vividly remember almost seeing myself like a CCTV camera, just zoned out, falling into whatever headspace it was, sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the words in my paces. And so homeschooling in that way, it can easily fall down the rabbit hole of this isn't healthy for a child anymore.
yeah,
And it takes a level of parental supervision aside besides from the educational work itself. It takes checking in with how is this kid just doing in general, like besides academically,
hmm
what's going on within, is the development developing, if you will.
yeah, yeah. I would imagine too, because I know some states, when it comes to the homeschool world, there's a lot more guidelines and like checking up that has to happen
Mm-hmm.
uh, within that space. California's pretty loose. Not gonna lie, with like you set up your school and like you're pretty good. You don't
Yeah.
really have to do follow up exams and testing and things like that. Other states, I know, I believe it's Missouri, has much more of like a yearly, like you have to pass, your kid has to pass a test, and then the state helps you kind
Yeah.
of assign where they're at and things like that. But it also helps, with that kind of like not necessarily needing
Keeping
to
kids
always
on track in a
keeping
way.
things on track, maybe not having to get
Yeah.
CPS involved and stuff, but seeing
Right.
where kids sit mentally, physically, those types of things, right? It's a
Hmm.
checkup, it's a yearly checkup almost,
Yeah.
is the way I kind of looked at it. And so, but I know for a fact, I don't know all of them by memory, but I've been learning more and more about the Midwest, is that mix of like some of the states are really loose with like you can just kind
Hmm.
of get away with murder, and others you have more of that structure of like it.
Yeah.
There is a checkup, and so to your point about that dissociating and kind of like seeing yourself almost like through a CCTV
Hmm.
camera. It's like there in some states are things in place to kind of like help protect kids from doing that, or to
Right.
at least help educators know like, okay, hey, like your kid is acting this way. This is not normal.
Hmm.
There's something
Yeah.
bigger going on here. And
Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
there's just a form of like it's so easy to in most states I feel like it's so easy to say, "Oh, we're doing homeschooling now." And not many people these days will bat an eye because of how popular it is
Right.
and almost I feel like it's been since COVID, it's gotten more and more popular because everyone was a homeschooler in 2020.
Yes.
And a lot of people realized how nice it was and how easy it was to be at home. And for a lot of parents, I think if, they were able to continue working from home after the pandemic, sorry, my
I
accent
like
comes
that.
out sometimes. Pandemic.
Yeah.
God, but if people can stay home, they will.
Right.
Like we were talking about earlier, our desk is our comfort space.
Yeah.
Like this is where we feel just at ease. The stress of the world melts off your shoulders, and the only thing you have to worry about are probably your editing deadlines.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
um,
mean, this is what I do for a job too. So that's the thing. I work with other
yeah,
podcasters. uh, so
yeah, and
yeah,
that's epic.
it's
That's
yeah, it's just
great.
editing. This is the editing zone right here.
It's yeah, yeah.
I w-
It's where you eat, it's where you breathe, it's where you sleep.
exactly. I did want to
Yeah,
ask.
yeah.
I kind of wanted to pivot just a little bit and talk about
Go for it.
creativity and where that kind of came in and how that came into your world. If people are watching the video, it, you look like a creative person. You look like someone I would meet on the street and
Yeah.
be like, they make art of some kind.
That's
Um,
that's an artist, yeah.
and which we don't, my brain, I don't typically associate that with rural Oklahoma. And so,
Right.
so just, I don't know, maybe, I'm trying to think of what my question is here, but like, can you unpack for me a little bit of like where the love for art comes from? And you talked about kind
Yeah.
of, disassociating, going to that fantasy realm. Does that play a part in it? Anything like that?
Yeah. So I feel like I really started drawing. I had always been a doodler, and I remember being younger and watching Ink Masters with my grandpa on TV and being like, "Oh, I'm gonna be a tattoo artist one day," and making my little flash doodles, right? But I do have a specific memory of getting my first like actual sketchbook on a trip to Walmart while we were in I believe it was Oklahoma City or Tulsa for a hospital trip to keep me occupied while we were in the uh whatever his room. Is there his hospital room?
Yeah.
I was trying to think if there was a better
No,
word.
I think that's
Um
right.
I think that's just it, yeah. But that was when I really was like, "Oh, okay, I kind of like this." And I think part of the reason that it resonated with me so hard is that it was almost shutting off my brain or at least quieting it down enough to where I could just concentrate on what I was drawing.
Hmm.
And I could just watch the line transform the paper into something else entirely. And I think kind of hand in hand, I have a very vivid mind's eye. Hand in hand, I think they both helped each other. It was like a knife sharpening a knife in a way. Um, because I feel like after after I left homeschooling and coincidentally also regained access to the internet, I had a phone, I had a computer. I feel like my creativity had dulled down. But that was just due to the fact that I didn't need distracted constantly
Right.
anymore. And that's something that's been kind of difficult to realize and not hold it against myself that, oh, you don't draw like you used to 5 years ago. Okay, well, you're a lot happier now.
Yeah. And life is those waves too of like
Yes.
of having a creative moment and then sometimes and then
Hmm.
it ebbs and flows, right? It comes in a
Yes,
big
it
wave and you're
does.
like, okay, I got all this really cool stuff, just like it's almost too much where you're just like, calm down, I need to
Hmm.
like, I can't get it out, right? I
Overwhelmed.
can't like
Yeah.
process it
And
fast enough and
then
actually like create it. fast enough.
Right. Before
And then
you burn
yeah,
out, pretty
exactly. And then
much.
you go through maybe
Yeah.
a wave where you're just kind of like it's even just a struggle to like create something because you're just like I don't.
Yes.
It's the well has run dry in a sense of like okay maybe I can do
Right.
something but it's not the same degree. And I think we always
Yeah.
crave that like going back to like that time of like oh I was like so
Yeah.
I call it productivity I but like just that
Hmm.
creative just like it's just
That
the
push, that
overflow of
drive.
yeah it's just there's always ideas
Hmm.
there's always something there. um
Yeah. And I think part of that for me was finding comfort in the creation of new ideas
mhm,
because of how stagnant my life and situation was while being homeschooled. While even though it was better once I went to high school, it was still, it you said it sounded very just similar to where I was before public school.
yeah
Um, but it still felt like something to fall into and something that was always there for you, whether you need it or not. To me, creativity is almost an entity in itself. It's a mother that you can crawl to when you need help, when you can't describe how you feel, or you can't really even mentally understand what you feel. If you sit there with a paper long enough, it will come out. And that's something that had always helped me. Whether it was just event drawing in my sketchbook or stupid fan art, it always just managed to make me feel a little bit better to see, oh, I can create this, and I like the way that this looks. Life isn't that bad. And it was just minimizing, well, I guess it was zooming in to those very small happy moments to block everything else out.
yeah
So like in a way zooming in on the pixels to not see the rest of the image.
right
Um and uh growing in my creativity after um high school, which it's only been 2 almost 3 years. It's something that I've had to find that drive rather than have no other option
hmm
than to create. It's finding that will to do it just because I want to,
yeah
just because I want to have these finished products and I want to feel this satisfaction, just because it doesn't feel as natural anymore. It wasn't natural, it was survival.
hmm
And that's something that I feel like if any other creative homeschoolers out there, and I don't think it sticks to homeschooling at all, just any creatives out there growing up or getting out of like that really heavy canon event part of your life, of your adolescence, it's something that you age a little bit and you realize that like it's like you said, the ebb and flow of life. Yeah.
the thing that I love so much about creativity and my art form if you will is well it's like two things but like I consider my like recreational fun is like I love Lego. And the great thing about
Yeah.
Lego is you
Okay.
can follow the instructions, which like
Mhm.
I'm a firstborn kid. I'm like a rule follower. Give me the
Oh
instructions, I'll
yeah. Oh
build
yeah.
whatever it is, kind of a thing. So like I
Yeah.
love that, but then the great thing is you take it apart and build something completely different with it and the imagination
Yes.
aspect of it.
Yeah.
And so a few years ago, we talked about like the dry spells and the needing to push yourself. I hit that in my life and it was like
Mhm.
burnout, nastiness. And I was like, I got to go get a real job to some degree. I got to like get outside of the
Right.
house, do something to reset my brain. And I worked at a toy store
Mhm.
that was primarily Legos.
Okay.
And we were like secondhand Legos. So we just had like big bins of just like loose pieces. And the
Oh,
cool thing about that
that's sick.
yeah, and the great thing about that is that like I would just build stuff, and I remembered I was thinking back to when I was a
Yeah.
kid and like the challenges I would give myself as a kid, sitting on the floor playing with my Lego and being like, "Can I make a
Mhm.
ball? Can I build a
Yeah.
person? Can I build this thing?" Like, and so can I only use one color to make something?
Right.
It's a problem solving creativity exercise that for me was just like
Mm.
it's like a necessary thing to like challenge myself to do it. And then once you do it, it like
Yeah.
unlocks that next thing. Do you have anything like that where you're like, I get stuck and I'm just like, okay. I mean, you brought up like doodling in a sketchbook, and just like it will
Hmm.
come out eventually, even if you sit there long enough. Is
Yeah.
that kind of your version of that, or do you have something else that you do?
Something that I love to do is mindless. So I do just draw, obviously, but at least for me there's a difference between working on an idea or throwing pen down just immediately. Something that helps me really process things is such it's so simple, but it's just hatching out lines and filling it in with webbing.
Okay.
And for some reason, the physical act of um hatching out what looks just like a complete mess and turning it into something that still looks cohesive, it's something that by the end of, a few hours of filling in the lines, it's almost like a trip of, okay, no matter what issue it is, if you just work at it long enough or you think about it long enough, that you will find some sort of answer. Whatever it is I'm struggling with, it helps me figure out the little minuscule thought like connections between the behaviors. I think I'm thinking of a specific type of situation. So say I'm in like another just specific rut, like you said before, when you were working in the Lego shop and just putting things together. Um, if I've had like a depressive week or a depressive day and I pull out my sketchbook and I'm just frustrated and I'm just almost fuming, I feel the anxiety and stress creeping up my back, I attack my paper. And that's something that's really helpful for me to get out that energy, and then it goes into the deep scribbling while my thoughts are while the synapses are firing and the tiny little micro thought connections are happening. I guess what I was trying to say was the subconscious thoughts underneath the conscious thought pattern,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. It's the mentally unspoken things that very tactile um movements help me work through.
A hundred
So
percent.
kind of like you putting your Legos
Right.
together, it's really that scribbling on
Yeah.
paper for me as well. It's such a weird reconnect
Yeah.
between the physical and the mental.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a lot of times just what is lacked is you've disconnected
Yeah.
and you need to get back into your body.
It's interesting because the brain does this thing where it will. Well, we're problem solvers. That's what humans do. We
Yes.
solve
Yeah.
problems. And
Hmm.
so what happens, and the reason people burn out and the reason people like overwhelm and things like that, is there's so many decisions we make in a day, and there's so many problems that we solve in a day, and it's all up here. It's all in the brain, and
Yes.
it's a
Yeah.
lot. It is more information we are processing on the daily than at any other time in history. It's
Constantly.
constant.
It's like you said, it's also on our phone. It's the dings. It's the noises outside on our street. There aren't quiet moments anymore.
And that's what doing something creative and putting pen to paper,
Yeah.
putting bricks together, putting
Yeah.
paint on a canvas, whatever your art is, and I think art is subjective. This is something else we
Yes,
can
art
totally get
is
into, but
yeah.
but it is it's one of those things where it, for whatever reason, it quiets the brain, and it will problem solve for you what is going on. So like I
It will. Yeah.
I had an issue with like a client, and I was trying to figure out like how to deal with it appropriately. It was just kind
Hmm.
of a like, I don't want them to be mad at me. I'm low key mad
It's
kind of a
just
thing. And
an
I was just, it's
uncomfortable
uncomfortable, and I didn't
situation.
know what to do about
Yeah.
it. And I was like, let's just do something creative. And whatever it was, whatever creative exercise it was, I just did it for like an hour. And like at the end of it, I was like, oh, this is a great solution. It just came to me after an hour, but it was that
Yeah.
hour of like taking
Yeah.
all the other things out of my brain and putting them in that
Hmm.
energy into something else. It like reset
Yes.
me. And so I think that's important.
It's stopping that overthinking,
Yeah.
that merciless cog turning, smokes coming out of your ears. You can just tell when your brain is just frying
Yeah.
because of the cortisol that's actually rushing through your system, and just it's turning off any type of you can't think logically
Yes.
when you're stressed out.
Yes.
All you can think about is what it is that's stressing you out, and, you know, the whole alphabet of what you can do about it. But nothing is just good enough.
Yeah.
Nothing is just perfect enough where you feel safe in reacting that way.
Yeah.
And stepping aside and letting your brain recenter itself and letting yourself reground to where you are and letting those emotions settle and simmer. It's like a can of soda. It's shaken, it's stressed. You sit it there for 5 or 10 minutes and you can drink it.
Yeah.
And that's just the human condition too. It's not, we're just cans of soda.
Yeah. This brings up a great point too of something I've been learning this past year,
Mhm.
and anyone who has watched the show knows. Like, I read a book not that long ago called "When Religion Hurts You," and one of the things that they talked about in that book was this always on kind of stress level in the background. Exactly what
Mhm.
you're talking about, the cortisol just running through you at all times. And when your body is in that stress mode, you go into like fight and flight mode. Um, and
Yes.
so you exist in that forever, and that becomes your new natural after a while. And I think this,
Mhm.
I'm going to tie this back into the homeschooling, but like a lot of homeschoolers were homeschooled for religious reasons or with religious curriculums.
Yes.
And so religion
Yep.
played a significant role. And unfortunately, religion tends to kick on that cortisol, push.
It does.
And
Yeah.
it's unfortunate because it messes with you truly.
When you're a kid, you can't tell the difference between literal, oh, I could die tomorrow and go to hell if I don't act right.
Mhm.
At least that's what that spurred for me, but continue.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, because I wanted to bring it back, because you had mentioned something earlier about, you know, the ACE curriculum being that Christian curriculum, kind of growing up in that Christian
Mhm.
environment, but always having this thing in your back of the brain that was like not really buying into that. And so
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could, explain more of your thinking when it comes to that.
Yeah, okay. So, my religious upbringing, my grandmother, her whole life, I believe her mother was Lutheran.
Okay.
And my grandmother also had an experience with running away when she was a child, and she fell into the arms of Baptists. And in Woodward, Oklahoma, Baptists, as far as the eye can see,
Yeah.
they're everywhere. Um, but she eventually, when I came around, we were going to like a non-denominational church. But church was fine and Sunday school was fine. I had friends there. Church wasn't a bad environment for me to be in. So my religious trauma wasn't necessarily from the church more than it was just from my grandmother, which with the ACE curriculum, that's the ACE curriculum is built upon a literal fundamentalist Baptist view of the Bible.
Right.
So it was right up her alley. And a lot of uh sorry, I just thought of this. I had found a quote earlier from the CEO of the previous CEO of the ACE curriculum. It was founded by this husband and wife, and later their son just ended up taking it. But Howard, the CEO, called AIDS a God sent plague meant to punish gay people and other idol worshippers, including feminists, pro choice, and Planned Parenthood activists. And from a very early age, I wasn't a fan of what I didn't know was bigotry until I got older and I learned more words. I wasn't a fan of the attitude that a lot of people in my circle had towards people that I saw on my TV that I didn't really see in my hometown. Um, and mixed in with just Christian ideologies and, you need to live this way, you need to act like this, otherwise God won't be happy with you, and you'll have to redeem yourself, whatever. Besides that, at least in rural Oklahoma, obviously homophobia was mixed in. Unfortunately, racism was also mixed in, and sexism was mixed in, and all the isms that you can think of, anything that a white person can hate someone else for, like that was somewhere in the community. Especially within the private school slash the homeschool groups weren't as bad because specifically there was the family that ran it, which they were kind of hippy dippy. They were from California. I loved them. Even though they were still very strict in their religion, they were more of the actual hate the sin, love the sinner type, but flip flop it, love the sinner, hate the sin. They would be the type to put that first. But uh, at least I started rambling with my upbringing and the bigotry and the hatred just not sitting right with me, not being something that I could bow and go along with, which is something that I feel a lot of kids do to receive the affection and approval of their parents. You know, your parents, at least in the Midwest, it's cute to be the mini me.
Yep.
It's cute to be just like your dad or just like your mom, you know, and it's there's another addition into it of it depends how radical your parents are with their own religious and political beliefs, but it can quite literally be beaten out of you as a child, at least down here. And that's something that I never experienced. I was not a victim of physical abuse from my parents, but I do know people who dealt with that whenever they were caught having lipstick in their drawer if they weren't born a girl, you know, or if they were caught uh going by a boy's name online, or you know, et cetera, et cetera. I've always held a lot of empathy within myself for people around me, and that includes the minorities around me within my area. And I'm white, obviously, but I'm obviously gay as well. I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community, and I think in a way that just also goes to prove that you're born this way, and it's not that you're born gay or lesbian or trans, it's that you're born with an innate moral code and a sense of empathy that sets you apart from other people in your life and sets you with a group of like-minded people who hold the same opinion of humanity, that there's no need to be strict with the human condition, that we're just existing, and that a lot of the rules placed on people or stressors placed on people's shoulders to behave a certain way in order to fit in doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But rural Oklahoma, you know, wear your jeans, wear your boots, wear your overalls, go to work. That's the area.
Yeah. You bring up a great point too about rural areas and lack of technology, which kind of can lend itself to lack of education, unfortunately. And I
Right.
even hate to say that.
Lack of
Lack of
experience.
experience. Yeah, exactly. And so I think
Hmm.
it can foster this area of fear of the unknown. And not
Yes.
that that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in a decently big city. Like I didn't grow up in LA. I didn't grow up in San Francisco, but like I
Hmm.
grew up in a bigger city in California. There was still a lot of fear around gay people. There was a lot of fear around trans
Right.
people. There was a lot of fear around like in my circles were Christian about Planned Parenthood and things like that, abortions and like
Yes.
all that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Um, it existed. However, I also wasn't walking down the street like if I saw a gay guy, I wasn't like losing my mind. I wasn't
Right.
freaking out uh,
Hmm.
because it wasn't uncommon. If that makes
Yeah.
sense. Like there was
You
no
still
avoiding
had
it.
a fairly there was a fairly diverse area there for you.
Exactly. I think it was interesting to move from California to Illinois and be in the Midwest and kind of have this. I grew up conservative. I was like, I'm a Republican. You know, if you're a Christian, you're a
Hmm.
Republican. That's the deal. Like, we love our
Yeah,
guns. Like,
that's
that's
yeah.
kind of the thing, right? But yeah, I love God. I love guns, and I love girls. That was like the thing. And I got to college, and it
Yeah,
was weird to be labeled as like a liberal conservative because I was just like,
right.
if I saw a gay person, there wasn't a physical reaction out of me. I just was like, oh, that's just a normal person living their life. I can
Yeah,
disagree
yeah.
with their lifestyle at that point, at that stage in my
Hmm.
life. That was what I believed. But I was like, but me, I don't need to be outwardly uncomfortable or
It
verbally
doesn't need to be
Yeah,
demonized.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I also grew up. My view on religion was that the way you win people over is through relationship, and it's through you get to know
Mm.
somebody, right? And you can then have
Yeah,
those deeper
yeah.
conversations around what you believe and what you think is right and what you think is wrong.
Hmm.
And that's the way you do it. You don't do it by standing on the corner of a street and yelling at people that they're
Right.
going to go to hell, kind of a thing.
Hmm.
Um,
Exactly,
and
exactly, yeah.
yeah, so it's kind of interesting to look back at some of those things now and be like, oh wow, yeah, because I've been that guy. I've stood on
No, for
street corners
sure.
as well with signs and promoted things. But you brought up
No, for
knowing
sure.
too that at a young age of like maybe not knowing, but like you can recognize in yourself that you were like, okay, I am
Hmm.
part of the LGBT. I'm different. There's
Hmm.
something about me that's different, um,
Yeah.
and that's okay. That's just inherently part of you.
Hmm.
Um,
It's something that I knew at that age. It wasn't a chosen, it was something that I discovered about this consciousness that I was
right.
embodying and this life that I was a part of. It was something that even at a really young age I could tell, like, not even that I could tell at that young of an age, my thoughts weren't necessarily going to, my thoughts and reactions weren't really going to lie to me like that because there was no other way for this kid to genuinely react besides what they were feeling in that moment. Or over the course of however many years of adolescent growth, thinking in your own head at a really young age, um, okay, but I don't like girls. Okay, but what if I do and no one in my family supports that? And it comes down to a point where, I don't know, maybe you're 10, 12 years old. I wouldn't still be thinking about it if I wasn't. It wouldn't matter this much. And that's something it comes down to. It's unless you're in a very affirming area, if you're anywhere near at least an anxiety that you might not be safe where you are if you are
Right.
queer, just anything that's not normal or just yeah. Um if you're nervous at all or genuinely stressed out about this new discovery about yourself, no one could choose that. No one would choose that discomfort and no one would choose that life path. If they could choose the easiest way, if I honestly, though I love being alternative and though I love being queer, I do know that life would be so much easier if I weren't.
Right.
Like that's just something I know. I would get a job way easier if I had brown hair. I would, not to mention the face piercings. Just brown hair, a natural hair color.
Yeah.
Um, maybe if my sense of humor were more typical, I would get along with more people in more spaces, but some people are just made to be a little funkier, and I think that's fun.
Yep.
I think a lot of those fun, funky people, unfortunately or fortunately, I think it's 50-50, end up being homeschooled just due to school not working for them. Being like a different case where, you know, school is cookie cutter. It's not made for everyone. There are some kids that just will not thrive in a public school situation, the same way some kids will not thrive in a homeschool situation. There is a time and place for everybody to be able to learn the way they need to and to grow the way that they need to in a healthy way. Um, where was I going with that?
Well, I think I wanted to ask. this now too was like
Yeah, go ahead.
you're a couple years out at this point of homeschool. I'm a little over a decade at this point.
You made
I
it.
think the youngest person or one of the youngest people I've had on the
Yeah,
podcast. And so you're the closest to it where like I can kind of look at it
yeah,
now and I have 10 years of reflection on it. And so
right, right,
maybe have gone through the cycles of anger to grief to acceptance to all these different
right.
emotions, and I'm not saying you haven't done that yet, but I do wonder where you sit with the homeschool experience now of like looking at it and going, okay, if someone comes to you today, and you kind of have answered this already, but if someone comes to you today and it's like, hey, I'm looking at homeschooling my parents, what are you saying to them?
Mhm.
What are you
I
advising them on?
Right. I would just, I would honestly have them sit down because I would say, this is going to take a minute.
Yeah.
They would, at least from my perspective, I would want to make sure that they knew that it's not going to be as simple as whatever curriculum tells you it's going to be.
Right.
Your child will deal with dissatisfaction. Your child will deal with frustration. You will deal with a very similar type of frustration when you feel like you're doing the best you can, but your child still isn't working with you on that. And there is a level of stepping back and not taking it so personally that as a parent, I feel like they need to realize it isn't me, it isn't my parenting, it's the way that I'm going about this, whether it's schooling, whether it's even just being at home more often. If another pandemic were to come around and someone was to be like, you were homeschooled, what was being with your parent like all the time? What was that like? How was that? And I can tell them, like, you need to treat your child with a little more respect because at the end of the day, they are still another human being and they deserve to be listened to, and their emotions are as true and honest as a human's emotions can be because they are a child. Even if you're getting into those adolescent years where misleading comes into play, if your child is misleading you, there is still another issue that's underneath that that needs to get talked about. And I feel like parents and their children can have great relationships if parents would just listen a little more. And, I feel like we are getting out of that age of children are to be seen, not heard. I feel like that's something that, even though we feel like as a society we aren't in anymore, that kids are get a lot more leniency than they did 20, 30 years ago, which I do fully agree with. We're still, as a society, kind of dealing with our just lump of collective trauma and collective aging. So, if that makes any sense,
Yeah.
we're coming to a realization that kids aren't not people until they turn 18.
Right.
You are raising this kid to be the person you want them to be. And if you want your child to be aggressive and not listen to authority and break rules, be mean to them and homeschool them horribly. And that's exactly how they will turn out. If you are your child's first bully, you will be the first person they run away from. And that's just a hard truth that I feel like a lot of parents, before they get into homeschooling, need to swallow. That genuinely, if you, it's kind of like a Pandora's box in a way. Once you open that, there's just, you keep going in the best way that you can, in the healthiest way that you can, while listening to your emotions as a parent teaching their kids and making sure to listen to the little guy that can't really fight for himself, and that is your child who you are teaching, who is stuck in your house whether they like it or not until the age of 18. And for adolescents and homeschooling, I feel like there should be a certain point where a parent takes into consideration their child's opinion on where they feel like they need to be, or if the child feels like they are out of place or if they feel they are behind, not connecting with peers that are their age or in the similar age group. There's there is an age where a kid reaches where they're autonomous. They have their own feelings, their own processing, their own cortisol rushing through their head. And it takes parental empathy to look at your child and say, what do you need? Not what is easiest for me and my situation raising you, but what is going to turn you into the most successful adult you can be. And that's what I feel like a lot of just homeschool parents don't take into account.
Yeah, I 100%. I agree. I think something I've been looking at more is there's a line between listening to your kid and the guidance that you're talking about, because if you
Right.
veer too far to the I'm only going to listen to my kid, you end up in an
Mm-hmm.
unschooling environment. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
unschooling, for anyone who doesn't know, is the point of homeschooling where it's like we're only going to do what the kid wants to do. So the kid has to want to
Yeah.
learn to read. They have to want
Mm-hmm.
to learn how to do whatever. And
Yeah.
I think personally, I think that's too far. Like you are a
Yeah.
parent still, and you do need to create some guidance and things like that. But I think more to
Yeah.
your point of what you're saying was there's also a point of looking at your kid and saying they are not thriving in this environment, and I need to listen
Right.
to them when they say this is not working for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we make the shifts. And we talked about it before.
Yeah.
Like my family, we started with a Becca. It did not go well. It was not fun for
Yeah.
us. It was not fun for my mom. It was not fun for me or my sister. Like it was just not
It was
fun. It did
not, it
not
was a
work.
lose-lose
Exactly. It
all
was
around.
not
Yeah.
good. Um, and that's why we started to pivot and we changed things up and we were like, okay, let's try this other math.
Yeah.
Maybe that one didn't work. Okay. Once we got to the thing that worked for us and we were like, this is it, which was Matthew
Mm-hmm.
C, by the way, for anyone who, if you know it, you know it. But
I don't.
Matthew C is like, I think I'm gonna say it's like a cult, but like if you know it, you know it. That's all I'm gonna say. Um, Matthew C
I'm
was
gonna have some Googling to
Matthew
do
C
later.
was great. But once we found that, it was like this is the thing, and it was just like we latched onto it, and it was good. Um,
Yeah.
but that took my mom looking at the way we learned and being like, okay, like we can make adjustments
Mm-hmm.
here. We can do this. We can pivot. We can
Yeah.
shift. Um, she also had that network of people who were in her corner also saying, you can shift. It's okay. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't have to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
golden every single year, and you can catch up. Like
Mm-hmm.
if one year just goes really badly, you can still make it up,
Yeah.
you know? Um,
That's the beauty of homeschooling.
it really is.
It makes school non-linear.
Yes, 100%. Well, and
Yeah.
you have in situations like myself where it's like my sister's 3 years
Mhm.
younger than me. There were times where we were learning very similar things, and so there's a lot of overlap when it
Mhm.
comes to that, right? Maybe
Yeah.
it's a similar
Yeah.
history or whatever. The actual workload is different. Maybe I write more papers and
Mhm.
she's doing coloring pages, or something like that.
Right.
But it was overall it was the same thing. So you kind of can do this double duty of like, okay, hey, we're gonna like this is what we're going to focus on. This is how we're going to do it. You learn to, for us, we learned how to learn in an environment where you have two very different thinkers. I'm pretty
Mhm.
atypical. Like my brain just, I would argue, operates like quote unquote a normal person. Like I don't have the
Yeah.
ADHD. I don't have the dyslexia. I don't have anything like that. My
Yeah.
sister is the polar opposite of that. She's got some of those things. And so the learning style is just very different. Well, you have to tailor it to
It
that
is.
person,
Yeah.
which is what we've been talking about is like figuring out what
Mhm.
works and roll with it.
That's what it takes. And at least for my specific situation, I just had a stubborn, bullheaded grandma, and I'm sure there are countless other homeschoolers that are in that same parental
Right.
situation. And the only thing that I want anyone still in homeschooling in a situation like that to know is that they are not alone and eventually they will be free. It sucks. It sucks so much. But it is encouraging to hear that, like, okay, some homeschoolers do succeed and they do turn out really well and they leave their hometown and they escape. they embrace their true colors and they blossom once they're out of that system. And with public school, that's a whole nother system that people blossom out of. But
Yeah, you said something at the near the beginning when we were talking about your homeschool experience, and you were bringing up
mhm,
your grandma being the one who homeschooled you, and almost raising
mhm,
you with that mentality of what she would have raised like a millennial with,
mhm,
and that schooling thought process. And I was and I've kind of been mulling that over in the back of my head this whole time, and thinking about it, and I was like, that's how like my parents were brought up. Like when my dad talks about
yeah,
going to school, he talks about feeling like a dumb kid sometimes and being left behind. But his parents
yeah,
were kind of that, what you're talking about, the refusal to change it, because they were like, but this worked for me,
right,
so it will work for you.
yes.
You'll get there eventually. And
And
then they
my
almost,
grandma had that same thought of, I was bullied in high school, you're going to be bullied in public school.
right.
So it's that same thought of it doesn't change.
Yeah. She maybe wanted better things for you, but also missed some of
And
the
that,
opportunity
yes.
to like actually truly make it a better environment for you.
Right. Yes. She was so it's being wrapped up in, your own trauma that you can't see that ooh, um things might be different and different outcomes are possible, and that's just on whoever's so wrapped up in their stress response that they can't step out of that. And
Yeah.
that's really unfortunate.
I feel like we could talk all day. This has been a great
We could.
conversation,
We could.
and
We
I
could
was
just
looking at the
yap and
time, and
yap and yap.
I was like, oh my gosh, we're almost at an hour 30 at this point, um, which
It's been
which has
good
been
though.
great.
It's
No,
just been it's yeah.
it's been a
Yeah.
great conversation. I think it's really flown by, but I wanna give you the opportunity. We talked about art. You're an artist. If people are looking
Yeah.
for art, what do you offer? Do you make art? Where can people
So
connect with you? That just let me hand it to you.
yeah, so I do some silly doodles. I do take commissions, but more so I do it for the enjoyment of it. Um, you can find me on TikTok, Marsh into Battle. You can find me on Instagram. My Facebook is dead. It is dead, dead. And I'm really bad about posting, but I will respond. I promise. And I also have a portfolio, which I can send you a link for if anyone's interested in what the inside of my brain looks like, which, yeah.
I love that. Yeah, and I'll make sure all that stuff
Yeah,
is linked in the show notes as well, so people can find you and connect and all
perfect.
that jazz. But yeah, Marsh,
Yeah,
this has been awesome. I really appreciate you. And
this has.
before
This
I
has.
really shut it down, turn it off, I guess. Is there anything else that has popped in your brain that you're like, okay, we didn't touch on this. We need to quickly touch on it.
I think my usual answer is no, I don't think I have any questions, but let me look through my tabs here. Mm. Oh, this was something that I was just researching on earlier and I thought was so funny. So the original founder of the ACE curriculum, his name is Donald Howard.
Yeah.
Great name, right? Um I found this random article just while searching like net worth, blah blah blah, campaign contributions, just trying to dig up the dirt I can, right? I find out that I'm just gonna read this verbatim from a Pathos blog. Mr. Howard, ACE's 52-year-old founder, is involved in a church controversy and in embarrassing civil litigation. In a civil suit in U.S. District Court in Missouri, two marketing consultants charged Mr. Howard with breach of contract. The suit also states that he was subject last September of a Christian tribunal, an unofficial jury of five fundamentalist church deacons in Dallas, judged Mr. Howard unqualified to serve as a pastor, deacon, elder, or Christian leader, according to the meeting's minutes. Why, you ask? The tribunal said that Mr. Howard has presented himself publicly as a preacher of the gospel and a Christian educator. At the same time, the evidence revealed that he carried on a series of clandestine immoral relationships with young women in violation of his marriage vows. According to the meeting's minutes, an attorney for Mr. Howard denies the allegations. But what assaultant doesn't deny their allegations? And I think that it's just whether or not, this went on. There's really nothing about this man's wife online so far that I've been able to dig up. I'll have a hyperfixation moment on it probably here in the next few weeks. But this sparked something in me today to hear that the founder, the original creator of a fundamentalist Christian education meant to bring children up in a righteous way under God, to teach them self-motivation and, keeping track of your own work and kind of just building up that ability to push yourself. That man who wanted to teach children all these values would break his own moral code that quickly and that
Yep.
easily. And it's just it kind of shatters the whole house of cards.
Yep.
It does.
Yep.
Yeah.
I
That's the eighth curriculum.
I don't blame you for hyperfixating on stuff like that, because I've been learning more and more
It's
about that.
really
And one of the
oh
reasons we
yeah.
got connected was one of the call outs I did on the show was that I wanted to talk to people about their curriculum. And the first thing you messaged
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
was, "Hey, I did the ACE curriculum. Let's talk about it," kind of a deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
what I've been learning as I've been educating myself, and not just homeschool curriculum, other curriculums and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, is just things like this,
Right.
right? You trace it back to who created it, the founders of it, anything like that, and you start seeing these
What kind of
weird,
people were they?
who are these people and what do they do? And I think there's a level of people can be redeemed. I still believe that. I think
Yes.
people can make
Yeah.
a rights out of their wrongs. But
Mm-hmm.
you look at the histories of some of these curriculums and some of these things, and it really makes you start to question, is this the thing that I should actually be handing over to my kid, and putting
Right.
them through?
Right.
And so I just highly encourage, if there's any parents out there listening, like, actually take the time to do the research on what is the history of this company. And I'm not just talking about pull up their
Yes.
webpage and look at, what they say about their company. I'm talking about actually doing
They
some of the
will
dig
tell
dives.
you,
Yes.
yeah, they will give you all this bells and whistles on their website. The ACE curriculum website's so polished, it looks beautiful,
Right.
it looks so godly. And then you read the comics in the book, and the black students don't go to the same school that the white students go to
Right.
within the curriculum's entertainment. And that's a lot
Right.
of people don't want to teach their children just inherent racism.
Right.
Maybe if you live in Oklahoma, maybe that's a conversation I don't even want to bring up.
That's a whole nother podcast, and
But
maybe we need to have at some point. Yeah, get some diverse voices in here
yeah.
and chat about those things. But
Yeah. Yes.
yeah, because but yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up here at the end of just like, please educate yourself on like, what is it that we're teaching our kids? What
Yeah.
is it that we're
Yes.
promoting and pushing? And do your own research. That's just do
Yeah.
it. Take the time to do it. It's worth it. I promise you.
Half the time, Reddit does it for you. It's not that hard.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
argue like Wikipedia can be a great jumping off point of like learning things, and
Right.
but it's going deeper than just the article. It's going deeper than just the Reddit
Yes.
post.
Yeah.
It's looking for that next level.
Yes.
But yeah,
Mm-hmm. For sure. For
Marsh,
sure.
this has been incredible. I thank
That's
you once
great.
again.
Yeah.
I
Thank you so much for having me on. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much, and for the audience, I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. You know what to do.
Yes.
If you enjoyed it, thumbs up, like, subscribe, do all of the things that you know. You At this point, we've been on the internet long
Press all the
enough. We
little
know.
buttons.
Yes, please do. And
Press
if
the buttons, interact. You know what to do.
and if you've got questions, comments, concerns, compliments, you can feel free to shoot me an email at exhsclub@gmail.com or a DM at exhsclub on Instagram, TikTok. I think that's the only places I have DMs at, but I'm on most of the socials as that as well. So that's it. Until next week, we'll see ya. All right. Peace and love.